à notre égard, je les ai entendus. Je les ai d'abord entendus dans la voix des réfugiés à Hadré. Je les ai entendus ensuite dans celle d'une vingtaine d'acteurs de la société civile soudanaise que j'ai reçus hier à Paris. Leur message est le même. Nous, les acteurs internationaux, devons créer un environnement international propice à la résolution du conflit. C'est pourquoi nous appelons à la fin de l'alimentation des combats par des acteurs étrangers. Le temps est venu de mettre un terme à ces actions cyniques. Le temps est venu d'étendre l'embargo sur les armes des Nations Unies à l'ensemble du territoire soudanais. Certains États s'y opposent, comme la Russie, qui s'est déjà opposée seule à l'adoption par le Conseil de sécurité d'une résolution pour la protection des civils au Soudan. Cette attitude irresponsable rappelle, s'il le fallait, l'hypocrisie de la Russie au Soudan et dans le reste de l'Afrique. Au Soudan comme ailleurs, nous proposons, avec nos partenaires, une autre voie, celle du respect du droit international et des aspirations exprimées par les peuples. Et je veux parler aujourd'hui aux Soudanaises et aux Soudanais. Aux forces armées soudanaises et aux forces de soutien rapide, je le redis, il existe une alternative à la guerre. Vous devez vous engager publiquement dans la voie de la négociation et de la paix, d'abord en concluant la trêve proposée par le Quad. Avec ses partenaires, la France se tient prête à contribuer à un mécanisme de surveillance et de vérification pour en assurer la mise en œuvre. Aux civils, je le répète, nous n'oublions pas vos appels pour la liberté, la paix et la justice, lancés au cours de la révolution de décembre 2018. Leurs échos doivent imprégner le processus de paix à travers la tenue d'un dialogue intersoudanais entre tous les acteurs politiques et sociaux civils. Et nous soutenons pleinement l'action du Quintet pour faciliter la tenue d'un tel dialogue en faveur de la réconciliation et de la paix, et sommes prêts à l'appuyer autant que nécessaire. Hier à Paris, j'ai reçu une délégation de jeunes Soudanaises et Soudanais, je l'ai dit, qui m'a appelé mon attention sur les difficultés que rencontrent les élèves soudanais à passer leurs examens de fin d'études secondaires. Cette situation ajoute à leur désespoir et fait craindre une génération perdue. Des solutions doivent pouvoir être trouvées à cette injustice. J'appelle ainsi tous ceux qui sont rassemblés autour de cette table à ce que nous travaillions ensemble pour répondre à cette demande. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, and excuse me please for being so rigid when looking to the watch because with a time frame for the afternoon. I would like to hand over to the United States of America and to Masad Boulos, a senior advisor to the President of the United States on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. Please.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. After more than 1,000 days of this war, layered on top of decades of recurring violence, it is simply unconscionable that the suffering continues. This is not just a crisis, it's a profound failure of international resolve. And today must be more than a commemoration, it must be a turning point. It can be a turning point. The Sudanese people have endured unimaginable hardship for far too long. The voices of the Sudanese people are clear. They are calling for peace, for dignity, for a future free from fear. Under the leadership of President Trump, the United States remains steadfast in its commitment to ending this war. We are working closely with partners in this room and beyond to press for an immediate shift from battlefield to the negotiating table, from violence to dialogue, and for ending this world's biggest humanitarian crisis. The United States continues to provide significant support for the humanitarian response in Sudan and neighboring countries. In February, we hosted the Sudan Humanitarian Fund Call to Action event with allies and partners in Washington and mobilized a significant amount of pledges for the humanitarian response. We announced over $220 million in new assistance in 2026. And if we include assistance related to neighboring countries, then the amount is over $500 million for this fiscal year. And this is added to the over $579 million funded in fiscal year 2025 for Sudan alone. We urge others to do more and burden share to address funding gaps and the humanitarian needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, and it's now my honor to hand over to Hajar Lahbib, EU Commissioner for Equality, Preparedness and Crisis Management, to moderate the next session on the humanitarian situation in Sudan. Please, Hajar.
Thank you, dear Minister, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and dear colleagues and friends. It's an honor for the European Union to co-host this conference, and thank you for being here. As we enter the fourth year of this devastating war, our thoughts are with the people of Sudan, those forced to flee and those who continue to suffer. Today, many crises are competing for our attention. But let me be clear, Sudan remains a top priority for the European Union. Over 33 million people in Sudan need assistance, a staggering number. Sudan now tops every crisis ranking, the largest humanitarian crisis, the largest displacement crisis, and one of the worst hunger crises in the world. It is also one of the deadliest conflicts. Estimates range from 50,000 to over 150,000 people killed. And this is also a gender emergency. As one of our partners recently told me, the war in Sudan has a face, the face of a woman. Being a woman should not mean being a target. Yet, women and girls face extreme risks. Sexual violence is widespread. Rape is used as a weapon of war, and they are hit hardest by hunger and most at risk when displaced. Sudan is also a protection crisis. Both parties continue to harm civilians and violate international humanitarian law and human rights law. Ladies and gentlemen, in Sudan, war is not just fought on battlefields. It is fought on streets, houses. It is fought against civilians. We are shocked by the horrors in Al Fasher, but it was not the first time. Remember Zamzam. Remember Janina. We have a collective responsibility to make sure this never happens again. But while we push for accountability, we cannot ignore what is happening right now. Siege tactics in Al Fasher, Dwelling and Kadugli, drones and rockets hitting food trucks and warehouses. Drones are changing the face of this war. In the past 3 years, more than 2,000 people have been killed in attacks on health facilities. The latest tragedy, a drone attack on a teaching hospital in Al Dain in East Darfur, killing over 60 people, including 13 children. We condemn strongly and clearly all violence against civilians and all violations of international humanitarian law. Deliberate attacks on critical infrastructure are devastating lives, and this must stop. The European Union has launched an initiative to protect critical infrastructure. The goal is very simple: to turn legal obligations under international humanitarian law into concrete action. We are discussing a draft memorandum of understanding with both parties. It makes one thing clear: civilian infrastructure must not be targeted. Let me now turn to the first panel, which I'm very honored to chair. It will focus on supporting Sudanese mutual aid. Last month, I convened a humanitarian senior official meeting in Brussels, bringing together Sudanese and international organizations, donors, EU member states, and neighboring countries hosting millions of refugees. One thing stood out: the strength of Sudanese mutual aid. I heard directly from Sudanese first responders their courage, their sacrifice. They are not just victims, they are the backbone of the response, the quiet heroes of Sudan, and we must support them in every possible way. Thank you. And before handing over to our first speaker of the day, I invite you to watch a video statement by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
Excellencies, distinguished partners, I thank the co-hosts of this vital conference, Germany, the African Union, the European Union, France and the United Kingdom. Today marks 3 years since the war in Sudan began. It is a tragic milestone in a conflict that has shattered a country of immense promise and created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Nearly 34 million people inside Sudan now need humanitarian assistance. More than 4.5 million have been forced to flee across borders, and credible allegations of the gravest international crimes continue to emerge. Women and girls have been terrorized and systematic sexual violence has prevailed. Families and communities have been devastated by bombardments and drone strikes. Humanitarian and commercial lifelines have been choked off, and famine has taken hold in what was once a breadbasket for the region. An entire generation of children has been robbed of education, and the consequences are not confined to Sudan. They are destabilizing the wider region. Excellencies, this nightmare must end. That requires unity and urgency. Civilians must be protected, humanitarian workers must be able to carry out their life-saving work safely and without obstruction, humanitarian operations must be fully funded. Yet last year, less than 40% of the humanitarian support required was delivered. This forced devastating cuts to food aid, medical services, and critical support for survivors of sexual violence. And despite growing needs, this year's response is falling even further short. Partners must step up. But let's be clear, funding alone cannot substitute for peace. An immediate cessation of hostilities is essential. External interference and the flow of arms that fuel this war must finally end, and a credible path must open towards an inclusive, civilian-led political process that reflects the aspirations of the Sudanese people. The United Nations is committed to work with you to deliver life-saving aid today and to help build a better future tomorrow. Once again, thank you for coming together in solidarity with the people of Sudan.
And following these very inspiring words, I now give the floor to Antonio Tajani, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Prime Minister of Italy. Please, Antonio, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Italy is here today with a clear message. The conflict in Sudan cannot be forgotten and must be solved quickly. We call for an immediate ceasefire and for the restart of an inclusive dialogue. Sudan must return the path of peace and growth. Dialogue is the only one solution for the country and the region. At a time when Pope Leo is on an important pastoral visit in Africa, we share his call for peace in all conflicts. We strongly condemn attacks against the civilians, humanitarian workers, refugee camps and civilian infrastructures. The international community must speak with only one voice. Italy strongly supports the work of the United States, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to end this war. Tomorrow I will be on mission in Beijing. I will raise strongly the need for China to engage more for peace and international stability. It's also key to ensure the full respect of freedom of navigation, also to allow humanitarian aid to reach people in urgent need. We are very concerned that other crises could complicate even more the humanitarian situation in Sudan and in Africa, with a crucial focus on Sahel. The increase in energy prices of the basic goods, such as cereals, risks to have a terrible impact on the region. Africa is an absolute priority for the Italian government. We are in the first line with the continent with initiatives like the Mattei Plan. To build partnership for shared growth, in this effort the private sector plays a crucial role. In Sudan, we launched many initiatives for more than 180 million euros, but we know that it is crucial to do more. For this reason, at the end of 2025, I launched Italy for Sudan, based on the model of Italy for Gaza. With Italy for Sudan, we bring together all the strengths of the Italian system, institutions, companies, NGO, civil society, and international organizations. With this mechanism, we already delivered more than 130 tons of humanitarian aid to Port Sudan by air and by sea. We allocated 6 million for emergency actions, especially for food, 5 million to FAO to support farmers, 1 million to the Red Cross to provide clean water in Darfur. I am pleased to announce that today we will allocate a new package of 30 million euro for the new project in Sudan and neighboring countries. We will focus on the three areas: health, education and agriculture. To support our strong shared commitment, we want to make available the experience we have developed with Italy for Sudan. For this reason, I intend to organize in Italy with Germany a meeting focused on humanitarian assistance for the population displaced within the country and the neighboring countries. The goal is to send a strong political message to contribute to a political solution to the Sudanese crisis and to bring peace and stability in the region. Let me be clear. It's crucial to reach as soon as possible a sustainable ceasefire and an inclusive dialogue. Today, on the tragic anniversary of the start of this conflict, we must speak, I underline, with only one voice to send a clear message: dialogue for achieving peace. Sudan, its young people and its children must not be forgotten. Thank you very much. I want to thank Germany for having us here today. I count on Italy, count on the Italian government to be part of the solution of this incredible war in Africa.
Thank you, Excellency. And now I give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, Al-Khariji. Please, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. سأكون مختصر للغاية في هذه الكلمة. أؤكد أن المملكة ستستمر في دعم السودان من خلال الدعم الإنساني ومن خلال شراكاتها مع منظمات الأمم المتحدة، ونعلن من خلال هذا المؤتمر التزامنا بتقديم 145 مليون دولار تشكل 5% من خطة الاستجابة الإنسانية للسودان، يضاف إلى ما تم تقديمه سابقا من مركز الملك سلمان للأعمال الإنسانية والذي يقدر ب 133 مليون دولار. وشكرا.
Thank you. And now it's my honor to give the floor to His Excellency, the United Nations Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Tom Fletcher.
Thank you, Commissioner Habib, and thank you to our hosts. And as you have heard from the Secretary General and others, this conference marks a grim and chastening milestone for us all. We must ask ourselves which statements were given a year ago that are similar to today's statements, and which statements do we risk giving in one more year which are similar to today's statements. Let me be very brief because UN colleagues will come in later with more detail. I'll give you the key contours, the plan, and the asks. The key contours of the humanitarian landscape right now, as I said earlier, Sudan is an atrocities laboratory. Sieges, denial of food, weaponized sexual violence, as Commissioner Labib described, the targeting of schools and hospitals. Chikwe from the WHO will say more of this later on. Drones have killed 700 people just this year, and 130 humanitarians have been killed over 3 years. I often have to call the families of those who died and they always ask, did our family members die in vain? And this isn't just a situation grinding on, it's getting worse. UNICEF, and Haneen will speak later, have documented that between January and March this year, 160 kids killed. And that's a 50% increase on the same time period last year. So 34 million people, 2/3, need help. 13.5 million people, 3 times the population of Berlin, are displaced, and you'll hear from Ralph and Ugo later on the regional implications of that. 19 million are food insecure, and Carl is just back from Darfur. 10 million kids out of school. And of course, the Middle East conflict is adding a layer to this challenge. Freight costs up 25%, rising fuel and food costs. Half of Sudan's fertilizer comes from the Gulf, and we're approaching the main growing season in April and May. So our plan, in line with the humanitarian reset, we have hyper-prioritized an effort to reach 14 million people within the overall target of over 20 million. We need $2.2 billion to do that this year. We've reached 2 million people already this year. We have devolved a lot of authority to the country team, an outstanding humanitarian coordinator. 35% of our funding is going to local organizations. We're delivering this in a reform system as part of UN80, and you'll hear more about later on, and the reset. We've got to keep the access routes open. That means ADRE, not just these 1 month, 2 month, 3 month extensions. More safe routes into the Kordofans, El Obeid, Dilling, Kadugli, and to Blue Nile. We've got to expand our footprint in Darfur. The Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator is now based in Tawila and into the Kordofans, and our Humanitarian Coordinator will be there this weekend. We now have 93 staff in Darfur, which is a trebling of where we were in October 2025. And we need you to help us prioritize the enablers, the flights, the security, the comms, the medicine, the logistics, to help our response. Our asks: please front-load the flexible multi-year funding. Our 2025 plan, as the SG said, less than 40% funded, with the leading funders 27% from the US, 14% from the EU, and between 3 and 10% from the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and Canada. Second, help us on the red tape. The visas, the travel permits need to move more quickly. We need ADRE extended permanently, and we need to reduce the delays on the approvals for our supplies and our convoys. And finally, as I said earlier, stop the flow of advanced weaponry, track the arms going in, insist on protection of civilians, and as you'll hear from Volker Turk later on, insist on accountability for the serious violations that continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom Fletcher. And now I give the floor to Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Germany for hosting today. Earlier this year, I witnessed some of the devastating toll of the crisis at the Sudanese border in Chad and at the Adre camp, where 85% of those there are women and children. I spoke to a community worker who said more than half of the women there had been victims of sexual violence. We saw the children separated from parents, not even knowing whether they were still alive. This conflict has caused the worst humanitarian crisis of this century, with 33 million people in need of humanitarian assistance, famine stalking millions of children, and the most horrendous atrocities, as we saw documented in the UN report on El Fasher. Last year, the UK brought partners together in London to galvanise international action on Sudan, raising over £800 million in support. But as we come together today, the war still rages and critically needed humanitarian aid is desperately needed too. So I can confirm today the UK will commit £146 million, that is over €165 million, in life-saving aid to Sudan. And as part of that, the UK will double our support to local aid groups, including the emergency response rooms and women-led organisations. People like the emergency responders I met who have started running community kitchens to provide food and support, but have built that to provide other services too, or the incredible group of Sudanese women who set up a makeshift support centre at the edge of a refugee camp for women who've suffered sexual violence and children beset with trauma. But humanitarian support won't ease the suffering if it cannot get through. And it is truly shocking and disgraceful the way we've seen the SAF and RSF and different armed groups continuing to weaponize access to aid, maintaining restrictions and attacking aid workers. And the humanitarian aid will not get through if we do not ensure that we get to an immediate ceasefire with the end to the atrocities, so that we can have a sustained, inclusive and lasting peace. That means pressure on the warring parties. It also means pressure to end the weapons flows, the financial and gold networks that are underpinning this crisis too. We have to build stability and security for the Sudanese people, not the chaos and collapse that we have seen, and we have to support them for their future. I finished with the words the women in Adre said to me. They said the world must listen to the women of in the Adre camp, not the military men who continue to pursue this conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette Cooper, for this strong statement and strong pledge as well. Now I give the floor to Cecilia Thiam, Director of the International Non-Governmental Organization Forum, followed by Hajuj Kuka, representative for the emergency response rooms. But first, Cecilia Thiam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and to speak. I'd like to focus a little bit on what those before me have said around humanitarian access. In Sudan, it's not just difficult, it's deliberately constrained. It's not purely administrative, it's deeply political. Access constraints fall into four main categories. The physical ones, marked by active conflict, sieges, and destroyed infrastructures. Administrative, as colleagues have said previously, around permits, registration, and dual systems. Security-related, as colleagues have also mentioned, marked by attacks on aid workers and convoys delivering critical aid. And political, with interference and the instrumentalization of aid. All of these result in delayed, reduced, or blocked aid, especially in areas with the highest needs. In addition to these obstacles, humanitarian space continues to shrink as authorities increasingly harass aid workers, impose restrictions on local responders, including through administrative interference, and humanitarians continue to be targeted. INGOs in Sudan have compiled a list of actions that, if implemented in a coordinated manner by member states, across capitals, can positively influence the protective environment for civilians in Sudan and enhance the operational environment for humanitarian aid. We've called this a menu of commitments, which I think many of you will have heard referenced already. It was also discussed during the senior officials meeting. And it focuses on four pillars, two of which I'll quickly mention right now. The first is on the protection of civilians, specifically on the safe movement of civilians, on preventing conflict-related sexual violence, and on the protection of civilian infrastructure. To this end, some of the concrete asks that we have for member states are to support the Atrocity Prevention Coalition and, in line with what the EUSR is doing on civilian infrastructure, to pressure parties to adopt a no-strike policy. In terms of access, we are, again, noting that it's deeply political and are requesting the neutrality of aid, continued enabling environment, and the protection of humanitarian movements, specifically through a simplification window in advance of the impending rainy season to facilitate the prepositioning of critical humanitarian assistance, to move from permission-based movements to notification-based movements, and to issue blanket guarantees for the delivery of critical assistance. Similarly to what colleagues have said, funding is important, but it's not enough. Condemnation of violations of IHL are not enough. We need political and diplomatic action, and we need it today. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Hajuj Kuka from Emergency Response Room, followed by Ahmed Abderrahman, Director of Operations of MSF.
It's a huge deal to have us here today, so we thank you deeply for listening to us. I and many other volunteers from the Emergency Response Room have been volunteering for over 1,000 days. I'm here before you to present over 100 members that we lost while working in the communal kitchens, in hospitals and clinics, in children's centers, or struggling to get needed resources from the markets. Representing over 26,000 coordinating members throughout Sudan, mostly Generation Z and women. We represent mutual aid, good governance, and solidarity economy. Our principles are transparency, equality, participation, and accountability. But one of our most valuable adherence is to neutrality and solidly resisting any pressure to be part of anything remotely political, including an opinion on how this war needs to end. Let's make it very clear. We have and will continue to provide humanitarian aid, life-saving, and recovery as long as our community need it. Despite if this war ends or not, we will continue working. We do not need permission, and we have proven that. We have proven that organized mutual aid, planned and implemented by the communities themselves that need it, can create miracles like evading the total outbreak of famine, which we succeeded to do together. This was possible through solidarity and partnership with Sudanese diaspora, with numerous donations from individuals around the world, with local international NGOs, with UN agencies and international donors. It's amazing to celebrate the ERs today. It would be great to take this to the next level, providing targeted, flexible funding that is at least 15% of the total pledged funding to Sudan, and also to provide advocacy to protect the volunteers and to make us continue working. The ERs are the roads that grew in the concrete. And let's all recognize that our volunteers represent hope for Sudan in the day after the war. So let's find ways to raise their capacity so they can build a diverse, beautiful, democratic Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you, Hajj Kuka. And now I give the floor to Ahmed Abderrahman, Director of Operation of Médecins Sans Frontières, and followed by Hind Al-Taif, Coordinator of the Women's Office of the East Nile Emergency Response Room.
Dear Chair, as the war in Sudan enters its fourth year, the warring parties continue to show a shocking disregard for civilian lives. Between January 24 and November 25, MSF treated 4,000 survivors of sexual violence in Darfur. 1 in 5 were children under the 18 years old. Shockingly, 41 under the age of 5. 97% in North Darfur reported that the perpetrator were armed men, majority identified as RSF. Aerial attacks continue to kill and injure. Since February, MSF has treated around 400 people due to drone strikes in various areas of Sudan and eastern Chad. Medical facilities are not spared. On 20th of March, the hospital in Ad-Dain was attacked by SAF, killing 64 people, including 15 children. On 2nd of April, a Jabalain hospital was attacked by RSF, killing 10 people, including 7 medical staff. These are not isolated events. During 3 years of war, MSF documented 100 violent incidents targeting its staff, vehicles, and supplies. Humanitarian access remains severely restricted. In Kordofan, access to besieged areas such as Kadugli and Delej is entirely blocked, and access to North Kordofan remains heavily restricted. Thousands, if not millions, remain out of reach of any assistance. MSF have witnessed recurrent outbreak of deadly yet preventable diseases across Sudan, highlighting a collapse of health services and vaccination program. In 2025, we treated 12,000 patients for measles, 42,000 for cholera. Looming rainy season will make this dire situation worse. Actions are urgently needed. We call on the parties to the conflict to adhere to Jeddah Agreement and international humanitarian law, including protection of civilians and the facilitation of unhindered access of humanitarian response. We call on the United Nations, all member states, especially the Quad, to take concrete action to remove all obstacles to humanitarian access. Humanitarian assistance cannot substitute for lack of protection. We call for an immediate end of violence against civilians, attack on hospitals and on healthcare workers. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will give the floor to Hind Al-Taif, Coordinator of the Women's Office of the East Nile Emergency Response Room.
شكرا جزيلا على هذه الفرصة، ويسعدني أن أكون هنا اليوم. في ظل الواقع الإنساني المعقد في السودان، لا يمكن الحديث عن الحرب دون الوقوف عند الدور المحوري الذي تلعبه النساء. فالنساء لا يتحملن فقط العبء الأكبر كضحايا للنزاع، بل يقفن أيضاً في الصفوف الأمامية كفاعلات رئيسيات في العمل الإنساني، لنجد أنهن الأكثر تضرراً، ولكنهن أيضاً الأكثر استجابة. يتحملن مسؤولية رعاية الأسر في ظروف قاسية، وفي الوقت ذاته يقودن جهود إنقاذ المجتمع، سواء عبر توفير الغذاء أو الدعم النفسي أو تنظيم المبادرات المحلية. لذلك من الضروري تجاوز الصورة النمطية التي تختزل النساء في خانة الضحية، والاعتراف بهن كقوة فاعلة وأساسية في الصمود وإعادة البناء. كما يبرز بشكل لافت الدور الحيوي للنساء المتطوعات اللواتي قدن مبادرات مجتمعية في غاية الأهمية، مثل التكايا وغرف الطوارئ وشبكات الحماية المحلية. ولم يقتصر دورهن على الدعم اللوجستي أو الإغاثي، بل كن في صميم التنظيم والاستجابة، حيث ابتكرن غرفاً نسائية داخل هذه الهياكل لتقديم خدمات متخصصة للنساء والفتيات والأطفال. هذه الغرف وفرت مساحات آمنة وقدمت دعماً نفسياً واجتماعياً وخدمات حماية، واستجابت لاحتياجات حساسة مثل الرعاية الصحية الأساسية والإحالة في حالات العنف. هذا الابتكار يعكس فهماً عميقاً لاحتياجات المجتمع وقدرة عالية على التكيف والعمل تحت ضغط شديد. من هنا تقع على عاتق الجهات المانحة مسؤولية إعادة التفكير في آليات الدعم، بما يضمن وصول الموارد بشكل مباشر إلى المستفيدين الحقيقيين، وعلى رأسهم هذه المجموعات النسائية الفاعلة. نحن بحاجة إلى تمويل مرن يعترف بدور النساء ويستثمر في قيادتهن، تمويل سريع الاستجابة ومستدام ويستند إلى مبادئ الشفافية والعدالة، بما يعزز الثقة ويضمن تحقيق أثر ملموس على الأرض. في النهاية، إن تمكين النساء ودعمهن ليس فقط مسألة إنصاف، بل هو مدخل أساسي لتعزيز صمود المجتمعات وبناء مستقبل أكثر استقراراً في السودان. شكراً جزيلاً لكم.
Thank you very much, Hind Al-Taif, to underline the critical role of women volunteers and women in general. And now I give the floor to Secretary of State for International Development of Canada, Randeep Sarai.
Hello, bonjour. Sudan stands at the most severe and devastating, as one of the most severe and devastating conflicts in the world today. After 3 long years of prolonged conflict, civilians continue to bear the brunt. More than 13 million people have been forcefully displaced, more than 21 million are facing acute hunger, and more than 33 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. There's credible evidence that starvation is being used deliberately as a method of war. Families have been deprived of their rights, freedoms, and the basic necessities of survival. Women and girls have described sexual violence as an inescapable reality. What we are witnessing is a profound disregard for human life. Today, Canada is announcing more than $120 million in new international assistance to support the people of Sudan and neighboring countries. This includes more than $94 million in humanitarian assistance for crucial life-saving aid such as food, health, nutrition, protection, shelter, water, and sanitation in Sudan, South Sudan, and Chad, as well as $25 million in development assistance to Sudan, which includes $18 million to Save the Children Canada to deliver safe, quality schooling for more than 60,000 girls and boys and to keep children safe from violence, exploitation, and trauma. This funding is in addition to the $7 million for UNFPA to expand sexual and gender-based violence prevention and response services to Darfur and Kordofan, and $1.25 million in peace and stabilization assistance. Canada believes that when people are suffering, we don't look away. We urge all parties to work to cease hostilities and end the war. We commend ongoing peace efforts to bring the parties together in a meaningful dialogue towards a peaceful resolution. And Canada continues to call for safe and unimpeded humanitarian access, an agreed ceasefire, and a credible path forward toward a civilian-led, lasting peace. The people of Sudan deserve a future, one defined by safety, dignity, and hope. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Excellency. And now I give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Norway, Espen Barth Eide.
Thank you, Hadia. Thank you to Germany for convening us. The situation in Sudan, as we all know, is catastrophic. It is unbearable and it's unacceptable. And I am appalled by the violence, by the lack of respect for human dignity and human life, and for the key principles of human rights and for international humanitarian law. The warring parties are responsible, and what we are seeing in Sudan is, frankly, a war against the Sudanese people, because they are the people who suffer, particularly, as so many speakers have highlighted, women and children. We need regional actors to enable peace, not to enable more fighting, and we need to work for a peaceful solution. But right now, we need to work for a stronger, better humanitarian effort, a humanitarian truce, and for humanitarian access. Norway today commits 42 million euros for humanitarian efforts and early recovery, and this comes on top of our core funding of the UN and other key organizations' efforts. We believe that we should all strive to do our utmost to strengthen the humanitarian effort in Sudan, as we strive also for peace. And I want to end by saying that I really recognize the work of our humanitarian partners, particularly the humanitarian partners of Sudan itself, who demonstrate, as we just heard, that the Sudanese are not only victims, but also actors trying to improve their own fate. And we really need to learn from their example, because if they can, we can also. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Espen. And now I give the floor to Georgos Gerapetridis, Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic. Please, Georgos.
Thank you, Hadja. We welcome the initiative by Germany, together with allies and friends, to convene this ministerial conference at a very critical juncture of the conflict in Sudan, which has reached aggravating proportion and threatens the region with a serious humanitarian crisis. I wish to welcome the presence of Sudanese civilian voices, including local NGOs, as their involvement is absolutely necessary to achieve a settlement of the conflict. We also reaffirm our firm commitment to the unity, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Sudan, and call on all parties to fully respect international humanitarian law. It is particularly necessary to develop a consistent approach towards migration and forced displacement in the Horn of Africa, which impacts flows both in the central and the eastern Mediterranean migration route. Especially, we suggest immediate withdrawal of all external actors, creation of safe passages for humanitarian assistance, organized returns